What exactly are artists painting panels? And why are more artists choosing them over traditional canvas or paper? In this introduction to Ampersand Artists Panels, Elaine Salazar explores the history of the brand, the benefits of painting on panel, and the unique surfaces designed for oils, acrylics, watercolour, pastel, and mixed media.
Hi, my name is Elaine Salazar. I'm the President and CEO of Ampersand Art Supply, and I'm excited to be here at Bromleys to talk to the wonderful people here about the different Ampersand boards that we're going to be covering today. I also was one of the founding members of the company, along with Charles Ewing, who was an artist in southern Colorado and had developed clayboard for his own use. He had basically created the product in his back shed because he was working with scraper board. And at one point, one of his collectors came back and said, look, this scraper board is coming off the backing, because he used to take a scraper board and put it on a backing. And so it came back and he thought, I'm going to make my own scraper board. So that's how clayboard was developed. And he and I and his wife were working on a project, and we ended up launching the company using this product. One of the wonderful things about our company is that Charles, and this is one of his pieces, is that he really was about being able to create surfaces for artists that were a joy to paint on, that gave you the flexibility of, for example, in clayboard, of being able to add and subtract pigment on the board and just help you with your creative process. I think that's what's really one of the key things about our company and the surfaces we provide with artists. The surface works with the artist and their process of building their work. So the other piece that Charles and we were really focused on was the permanence of the work. So we really worked hard over the years to develop the kind of technology that really sealed wood and that would allow an artist to pick up a board and just begin doing what they do best, and that's paint or draw, and not worry that their painting was not going to last. So we're really about not just the joy of painting on the surfaces, but how they're prepared and how an artist's work is important to that process and how they can be confident that their work will last over time. So the real question is, why paint on a panel over canvas, over paper? There are various reasons why artists have migrated over to painting on a rigid surface. Probably one of the most obvious ones is what happens to light. On a canvas, light is absorbed into the weave of the fabric, just as it is on paper. On a panel, what happens is light reflects off the surface. So when you're going to see color on panel versus a canvas, you're going to see brighter colors, much more luminosity on a rigid panel than you are on a canvas. That's one advantage. The other advantage is that on a canvas, you see you have that give and the bounce of the canvas. So that's not going to give you as much control unless you really have a tight stretched canvas as you do on a rigid board. When you're working on a canvas, stretched canvas, you're actually getting the bounce of the canvas. So you're not going to get as much control of your piece as you do on a rigid panel. This one, you're just basically, nothing is giving. You are actually controlling whatever is happening with that brush work. The other advantage of working on a panel over canvas is one of permanence. With a canvas, what'll happen over time is the glues in the canvas will basically deteriorate. Your canvas can rot, as we've seen in many of the masters' paintings that have been done on canvas. And so over time, the only thing holding up the paint film is the paint film itself on that work of art. That's why if you look at what a lot of conservators have done in the world, they actually are putting the old masters' pieces on a rigid surface to preserve them. When you're working on a panel, what's going to happen is that paint film is held up by that rigid surface. But not all wood panels are archival. Wood is still wood. It has its lignins and its tannins in the wood. If you are working on a panel, you want to make sure that you have sealed the panel well, because a lot of the lignins and tannins that exist in the wood are going to seep through your pigments on the surface of your ground if you're not careful. What Ampersand does is it has its Archiva-Seal coating, and I want to talk about that because it is what sets Ampersand boards apart from any other panel that you paint on in the marketplace. So Ampersand takes a high density fiber board that actually is not just any fiber board. The densities of the boards that we use are greater than 65 psi. They really look at internal bond strengths. We have modulus of rupture that is over 5,500 pounds per cubic foot. So those are all the attributes that we have with this base board, but then we do the next most important thing, and that is we put our Archiva-Seal process in place before we lay any grounds on the board. So the first step in this Archiva-Seal process is that we take these fillers and they seep into the fibers of the wood and they encapsulate those fibers, so that over time those fibers can't bring any lignins or tannins to the ground at all. And then on top of those fillers, we actually lay this specialty coating that we developed called the Archiva-Seal. It's a top coat that creates a very good adhesion layer between the board, the Archiva-Seal, and our coatings. This is gesso board and gesso coating. Some artists will say, well, I can just gesso my surface. If you just gesso a board and don't seal it the way we seal it, you will see the difference between this sort of white surface versus this surface that is more opaque, yellowing. Over time, if you just put a gesso coating on top of a board without properly sealing it, your grounds will begin to get yellow. So that can affect your painting over time. So that's a big difference between Ampersand boards and other boards you see on the market, is we are about the permanence of an artist's work. It's really important to us. It's the foundation of our company. When Charles Ewing began this company, he was not just about the wonderful joy of painting on these surfaces, but it was really about can we ensure that an artist's work will last over time. And that's why we create this Archiva-Seal process on all our museum series panels. When we're talking about the Ampersand Museum Series, one of the most important things besides the base board that we use, that's a very high density, very solid wood that we use with those Archiva-Seal fillers that we use, we also think about that when we make our cradle panels. We have a panel that we take that gesso board panel, for example, that you can buy in a flat. We also put this frame on it called a cradle frame. And what we use is a 13 birch plywood. As you can see, it's very highly engineered. Every one of the plies is even. When you get into really large panels with our boards, they're not going to warp because this is going to keep it stable. That's the difference with painting on a board that has solid wood. The solid wood still has all the cellular structure in it. So when it moves into a dry environment, those cells kind of shrink. When it moves into a wet environment, the cells open up and they accept the moisture. So if you go in and out of a dry climate to a wet climate, you're going to potentially see warping on a solid wood frame. That's why Ampersand uses this high-end birch plywood to do the frames. They're available in a 7/8 inch profile as well as a 1.5 inch profile. One of the really important values that we have as a company is what happens to our products in the environment. So we ensure that all of our products that are used come from FSC-certified forests that have renewable sources being used in them, and that's a very important part of our sourcing process at Ampersand Art Supply when we're working with boards.
From ultra-smooth painting surfaces to watercolour panels and specialist mixed media boards, there's a lot more to explore in the Ampersand range. Watch the rest of this series for an in-depth look at each surface, or visit Bromleys to shop the full collection. And of course, a huge thank you to Elaine Salazar for joining us and showing just how versatile Ampersand panels can be.